To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Serpent's Garden. Cole Brennan adjusted his black suit jacket as he watched his 8-year-old son Dylan fidget with his tie across the crowded reception hall. The boy's dark hair was slicked back, making him look older than his years, but his nervous energy betrayed his age. Cole had debated bringing Dylan to his ex-wife's wedding, but the court order was clear. Shared custody meant shared responsibilities, even when those responsibilities included watching the woman who destroyed their family marry her affair partner. The Riverside Country Club buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. White roses and gold ribbons decorated every surface, a stark contrast to the simple ceremony Cole and Lydia had shared 12 years ago in a small chapel outside Fort Bragg. Back then, Cole was still active military intelligence, and Lydia was a young nurse who claimed to love his dedication to service. How quickly things changed when that service required long deployments and classified missions she couldn't understand. "Dad, can we leave soon?" Dylan whispered, tugging at Cole's sleeve. "I don't like it here." Cole knelt down to his son's level, studying the boy's pale face. Dylan had always been perceptive, inheriting both his mother's intuitive nature and Cole's analytical mind. "What's wrong, buddy? Everyone keeps staring at us. And Mom's new family." Dylan's voice trailed off as his eyes darted toward a group of well-dressed people near the bar. "They don't want us here." Cole followed his son's gaze to where Lydia's new in-laws clustered around Troy Holbrook, her new husband. Troy stood 6'3" with the kind of artificially perfect smile that came from cosmetic dentistry and inherited wealth. His family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states, and they'd made it clear from the beginning that they considered Cole's military pension and carpentry business beneath their standards. "We're here because you're part of this family too," Cole said, though the words tasted bitter. "Your mom wanted you at her wedding." That was partially true. Lydia's lawyer had insisted on Dylan's presence for appearances, though she'd made it clear through intermediaries that Cole wasn't expected to stay long. The message was obvious: pay your respects, drop off your son, and disappear. Cole stood and scanned the room, automatically cataloging exits and potential threats, old habits from his intelligence days. The reception was held in the club's main ballroom, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured golf courses. 200 guests mingled between round tables draped in cream linens, most of them Troy's business associates and Lydia's new social circle. Cole recognized fewer than a dozen faces, all distant relatives who'd sided with Lydia during the divorce. Near the head table, Lydia laughed at something Troy whispered in her ear. She wore an off-white dress that probably cost more than Cole's mortgage payment. Her auburn hair swept into an elaborate updo that showcased diamond earrings, Troy's wedding gift. At 34, she was still beautiful, but there was a hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. Success and social climbing had sharpened her features into something more calculating. Cole Brennan. The voice behind him carried the condescending tone of inherited privilege. Cole turned to find Reed Morrison, Lydia's younger brother, approaching with a champagne flute in one hand and a smirk on his face. Reed worked in his father's investment firm and had always treated Cole like hired help, even during the marriage. "Reed." Cole's acknowledgement was neutral, professional. "Surprised to see you here," Reed continued, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Thought you'd have the decency to stay away." Cole felt Dylan press closer to his side. "Court order says I'm supposed to be here." Right. The custody arrangement." Reed's laugh was sharp, though I have to wonder why Lydia bothers. "It's not like you can provide much for the boy. Troy's already talking about private schools, maybe even boarding school. Give Dylan some real opportunities." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Cole's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Years of interrogating enemy combatants had taught him to control his reactions, to reveal nothing that could be used against him. "Dad." Dylan's voice was barely audible. "Can we please go?" Before Cole could respond, Troy's father, Harrison Holbrook, materialized beside Reed. The elder Holbrook was a silver-haired man in his 60s, with the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of boardroom power plays. His steel-gray eyes assessed Cole like a used car he was considering. "So you're the first husband," Harrison said without preamble. "Have to say, I expected someone more substantial. Cole smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Disappointed? Just surprised Lydia settled for so little the first time around. Harrison sipped his whiskey. Though I suppose we all make mistakes when we're young. The circle was growing. Troy's younger brother Austin joined them, along with two of his college fraternity brothers. Cole recognized the formation, a pack surrounding isolated prey. Dylan's hand found his father's, small fingers gripping tight. The thing is, Reed continued, emboldened by his audience, some people know their place. But others, he gestured vaguely at Cole. Others think they deserve things they haven't earned. Like respect. Cole asked quietly. Austin Holbrook laughed. Respect is earned, not demanded. And what exactly have you accomplished? A few years playing soldier, then what? Building cabinets for housewives. Dad makes beautiful furniture, Dylan said suddenly, his young voice carrying across the group. He made Mom's jewelry box. She still uses it. The comment drew uncomfortable glances. Everyone knew Lydia had kept many of Cole's handcrafted pieces, despite her claims that their marriage meant nothing to her now. Sweet kid. Troy's fraternity brother, a red-faced man named Phillips, said with false sympathy. Shame he'll have to learn the truth about his father eventually. What truth is that? Cole's voice remained level, but something in his tone made Phillips step back instinctively. That some men are leaders, Harrison answered, and others are followers. Some build empires, others just follow orders. Cole nodded slowly, as if considering the wisdom. You know what I learned following orders? The group leaned in, expecting either submission or an outburst they could mock. I learned how to identify targets, Cole said simply. How to gather intelligence, how to plan operations, and most importantly, he smiled again, and this time several men unconsciously shifted their weight. How to be patient. Dylan tugged his sleeve urgently. Dad, we need to go now. Something bad is going to happen. Trust me, Daddy. Cole looked down at his son, seeing something in the boy's eyes that made his decision immediate. Dylan's intuition had always been sharp, a trait that had served Cole well during their camping trips and fishing expeditions. If his son sensed danger, Cole trusted that instinct completely. Of course, buddy. Cole straightened, his gaze sweeping the circle of men who'd spent the last 10 minutes systematically humiliating him in front of his child. Gentlemen, it's been educational. Reed stepped closer, apparently unsatisfied with the level of degradation achieved. Running away already? Guess the military didn't teach you how to stand and fight. Cole paused, turning back slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that had once commanded respect from hardened soldiers in active combat zones. The military taught me many things, Reed. But the most important lesson? Cole's smile was razor-thin. The difference between a battle and a war. As father and son walked toward the exit, Cole heard Harrison Holbrook's voice behind them. Well, that was easier than expected. I thought he might actually have some backbone. Their laughter followed Cole and Dylan across the ballroom. But Cole's expression remained serene. He'd learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who underestimated their opponents. These men had just made a critical tactical error. They'd shown their hand while assuming he had no cards to play. At the coat check, Dylan looked up at his father with worried eyes. Are you okay, Dad? Cole knelt down, placing both hands on his son's shoulders. I'm perfect, Dylan. And you know what? I think this turned out to be a very good day. But they were mean to you. They said horrible things. Yes, they did. Cole's voice was gentle, but carried an edge that made Dylan study his father's face more carefully. And now I know exactly who they are. As they walked to Cole's pickup truck, Dylan chattering about wanting ice cream for dinner, Cole's mind was already working. 12 years of marriage had taught him everything about Lydia's weaknesses, her fears, her secrets. 2 hours of conversation had revealed similar intelligence about the Holbrook family. And his son's warning about something bad happening had been more prophetic than the boy realized. Something bad was indeed going to happen, but not to them. Cole started the engine and pulled out of the country club parking lot, passing beneath elegant streetlights that cast long shadows across manicured lawns. In his rearview mirror, he could see the reception hall glowing with warm light, filled with people who believed themselves untouchable. They had no idea that Cole Brennan had just declared war. Chapter 2. The Strategist's Mind. Cole's workshop occupied the entire basement of his modest 2-story house on Maple Street, a far cry from the luxury developments where Lydia now lived. The space was organized with military precision, hand tools arranged by size and function, lumber stacked according to type and grade, workbenches cleared and ready for use. Dylan often did homework at the small desk in the corner while Cole worked, the sound of sanding and measuring providing a comforting backdrop to their evenings together. Tonight, 3 days after the wedding reception, Cole sat at his drafting table with a legal pad and a cup of black coffee, but he wasn't sketching furniture designs. Instead, he was doing what he'd done countless times during his military intelligence career, building a comprehensive profile of his targets. The Holbrook family had made their fortune through strategic acquisitions and aggressive business practices. Harrison had started with a single dealership in 1985 and expanded through leveraged buyouts, often leaving former owners financially devastated. Troy followed his father's model, specializing in luxury imports and treating competitors like obstacles to be eliminated rather than rivals to be respected. But Cole's research had revealed something more interesting than simple ruthless capitalism. The Holbrooks had a pattern of targeting specific types of businesses, family-owned operations with sentimental value that could be acquired below market value when owners faced personal crises. They'd perfected a system of identifying vulnerable targets, creating pressure through various means, then swooping in with rescue offers that ultimately benefited only them. Cole had spent 2 days in the public library, using skills learned during intelligence-gathering operations to piece together a picture that few people ever saw. Property records, business filings, newspaper archives, and social media profiles all contributed to a comprehensive understanding of his adversary's methods and vulnerabilities. The front door opened upstairs, followed by the sound of Dylan's backpack hitting the floor and the boy's voice calling out his arrival. Cole glanced at his watch, 3:30 p.m., right on schedule. The bus dropped Dylan at the corner every weekday, and the boy walked the 3 blocks home alone, an independence that Lydia constantly criticized but Cole encouraged. Self-reliance was a crucial life skill, especially for a boy who might need to navigate increasingly complex family dynamics. "Dad, you down there?" Dylan's footsteps thundered down the wooden stairs, followed by the boy himself, still wearing his Riverside Elementary uniform polo shirt and khaki pants. His dark hair was disheveled from the school day, and he carried a manila folder thick with papers. "Right here, buddy. How was school?" Dylan dropped into the chair beside Cole's drafting table, his expression serious beyond his years. "Mrs. Patterson says I need you to sign these forms." And he hesitated, glancing at Cole's legal pad covered with notes and diagrams. "Are you working on something secret?" Cole closed the pad casually. "Just planning a project." "What kind of forms?" "Field trip stuff. And there's a note about parent-teacher conferences." Dylan pulled papers from the folder, spreading them across Cole's work surface. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. At Mom's wedding, when those men were being mean to you, why didn't you get angry?" "I would have been really mad." Cole set down his coffee and gave Dylan his full attention. This was important. How he handled his son's questions about conflict and response would shape the boy's understanding of strength and strategy for years to come. "What do you think would have happened if I'd gotten angry?" Dylan considered this seriously. "Maybe you would have yelled at them? Or, I don't know, hit someone." "And then what?" "They probably would have called security. Maybe the police." Understanding dawned in Dylan's eyes. "You would have looked like the bad guy." "Exactly. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm and think." Cole picked up a pencil, using it to illustrate his point on a scrap of paper. "If someone attacks you here," he drew an X, "and you attack back right away," he drew an arrow. "You're fighting on their terms, in their chosen location, at their chosen time." Dylan leaned forward, intrigued. "But if you wait? If you wait, you can choose when and where and how to respond. You can gather information. You can plan." Cole drew several more arrows from different directions, all converging on the original X. "You can make sure that when you do act, it's decisive. Like in chess." "Exactly like chess. Good players think several moves ahead." Dylan studied the diagram, his young mind processing concepts that many adults never grasped. "So you're thinking several moves ahead about Mom's wedding?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth his 8-year-old could handle. "I'm thinking about making sure you're protected and respected, no matter what happens with the adults in your life. But you're not going to hurt anyone, right?" The question hung in the air, loaded with a child's desperate need for reassurance that his father wasn't a monster. Cole looked into his son's eyes that held Lydia's intelligence but Cole's steady determination, and chose his words carefully. I'm going to make sure that people treat you with the respect you deserve. And I'm going to make sure that anyone who tries to hurt our family faces consequences for those choices. Cole reached over and ruffled Dylan's hair. But you don't need to worry about any of that. Your job is to be a kid, do well in school, and let me handle the adult problems. Dylan nodded, seemingly satisfied. He gathered his school papers and headed back upstairs to start homework, leaving Cole alone with his thoughts and plans. Cole reopened his legal pad and reviewed the intelligence he'd gathered. The Holbrook family's weakness was the same as their strength. They operated as a unit, each member's success dependent on the other's continued prosperity and reputation. Troy's dealerships relied on financing arranged through family connections. Austin's law practice existed primarily to handle family business. Harrison's investment portfolio was deeply intertwined with his son's ventures. More importantly, their social standing depended on maintaining an image of successful, ethical business practices. The country club memberships, charity board positions, and political connections all required pristine reputations. Men like the Holbrooks could survive financial losses, but public humiliation and social exile were different matters entirely. Cole's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Cole, this is Ashley from Lydia's work. Can we talk? It's important. Ashley Chun. Cole stared at the message, his analytical mind immediately suspicious. Ashley Chun was Lydia's supervisor at Riverside General Hospital, where Lydia worked as a surgical nurse. They'd met a few times during social functions, and Ashley had always seemed professional but distant. Why would she be contacting him now, 3 days after the wedding? He typed back, "What about?" The response came within minutes, not over text. "Can you meet me at Brewster's Coffee on Main Street tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Please, it's about Dylan." Cole's blood went cold. Any threat to his son triggered protective instincts that had been honed through years of high-stakes military operations. He typed, "I'll be there." The rest of the evening passed in routine normalcy, helping Dylan with math homework, cooking dinner together, watching a nature documentary about wolves that Dylan had chosen from the library. But underneath the domestic calm, Cole's mind was racing through possibilities and contingencies. At 9 p.m., after Dylan was asleep, Cole returned to his workshop and opened a locked filing cabinet that contained documents from his military service. His discharge papers showed an honorable separation from Army intelligence, but they didn't tell the complete story. The real story was classified at levels that would remain sealed for decades, involving operations in theaters that officially didn't exist against adversaries who were never publicly acknowledged. Cole had left military service by choice, seeking a normal life with Lydia and their newborn son. But the skills he'd developed, surveillance, intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and when necessary, direct action, those skills were permanent acquisitions that no discharge paperwork could erase. He pulled out a small digital camera and a set of lockpicks, tools he'd maintained out of professional habit rather than any expectation of future use. Tomorrow's meeting with Ashley Chun would require careful preparation. If someone was threatening his son, Cole needed to understand the exact nature of that threat before deciding how to respond. As he prepared his equipment with practiced efficiency, Cole reflected on the irony of his situation. Lydia had divorced him partly because his military career made her feel unsafe, exposed to dangers she couldn't understand or control. She'd wanted stability, predictability, a husband who came home every evening without classified secrets and lethal skills. Now those same skills might be the only thing standing between Dylan and whatever threat was serious enough to make Ashley Chun risk contacting her friend's ex-husband. Cole locked his equipment in a small case and headed upstairs to bed, but sleep was elusive. Through his bedroom window, he could see the lights of Riverside's affluent neighborhoods, where the Holbrooks slept peacefully in their mansions, confident in their power and security. That confidence was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Chapter 3. The Nurse's Warning. Brewster's Coffee occupied a corner building on Main Street, its large windows offering clear sightlines in all directions. One of the reasons Cole had approved the location. He arrived 15 minutes early, positioning himself at a table where he could observe the entrance while keeping his back to a solid wall. Old habits from intelligence work, but habits that had kept him alive in places where survival required constant vigilance. Ashley Chun appeared precisely at 2 p.m., scanning the coffee shop nervously before spotting Cole. She was a petite Asian-American woman in her late 30s, always impeccably dressed and professionally composed during their previous encounters. Today, however, her usual confidence was replaced by obvious anxiety. Dark circles under her eyes suggested recent sleepless nights, and her hands trembled slightly as she approached his table. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." Cole studied her face, cataloging the signs of stress and fear. "Your message mentioned Dylan. That's not something I ignore." Ashley nodded, glancing around the coffee shop to ensure their conversation couldn't be overheard. The afternoon crowd was sparse, a few students with laptops, an elderly couple sharing a newspaper, a businessman typing on his phone. No one paying attention to their corner table. "I need to tell you something about Lydia and Troy," Ashley began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something that could affect Dylan's safety." Cole leaned forward slightly, every instinct alert. "I'm listening." "Troy has been inappropriate at the hospital. Not with patients," she added quickly, "but with staff, especially the younger nurses. He comes by to pick up Lydia, but he also makes excuses to visit other departments, to linger in break rooms, to offer rides to women who work late shifts." "Lydia knows about this?" Ashley's expression darkened. "That's the problem. She does know, and she doesn't care. In fact, she's been covering for him. When Sandra Martinez filed a complaint about Troy cornering her in the parking garage, Lydia vouched for his character. Said Sandra was probably misunderstanding his friendliness." Cole felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest, the same emotional detachment that had served him during intelligence operations when personal feelings could compromise judgment. What does this have to do with Dylan? Last week, before the wedding, Troy was asking questions about Dylan's schedule. When does he get home from school? Does he have after-school activities? What time does he go to bed on weekends when he stays with Lydia? Ashley's hands clenched into fists on the table. "At first, I thought he was just trying to be a good stepfather, but combined with his behavior toward young women, the implication hung between them like a loaded weapon." Cole's expression remained neutral, but his pulse quickened as protective instincts engaged at their highest level. "Are you saying you think Troy is a predator?" "I'm saying he shows patterns that concern me professionally and personally. And I'm saying that when I tried to discuss my concerns with Lydia, she told me to mind my own business. She said Troy was good to her, and that was all that mattered." Ashley pulled a manila envelope from her purse, sliding it across the table. "There's more. I did some research on my own time, using resources available to hospital administrators for background checks." Cole opened the envelope and found printouts of news articles, court documents, and professional licensing records. The top article was dated 3 years earlier. "Local business owner settles sexual harassment lawsuit." Troy was sued by a former employee at one of his dealerships, Ashley explained. A 19-year-old receptionist named Katie Fulton. "The case was settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement, but I have a friend who worked for the law firm that represented her." Cole scanned the documents, his intelligence training allowing him to quickly extract key information. The pattern was clear. Troy had a history of targeting young women in vulnerable positions, using his wealth and family connections to silence complaints and avoid consequences. "There's more," Ashley continued. 2 other incidents that never became lawsuits because the victims were afraid to come forward. Both involved women under 21. Both worked in service positions where they couldn't afford to lose their jobs. "How did you get this information?" "Hospital administrators network with each other. We share information about potential threats to staff safety, especially when someone has access to our facilities through family connections." Ashley's voice carried professional authority now, the nervousness replaced by the competence that had made her a respected supervisor. "Troy Holbrook represents a credible risk to the women on my staff." Cole closed the envelope, his mind already processing the tactical implications. This intelligence changed everything about his planned response to the wedding reception humiliation. What had begun as a matter of personal dignity was now a question of his son's physical safety. "Why come to me with this? Why not report it to authorities?" Ashley's laugh was bitter. "Report what? Suspicions? Settled lawsuits? Questions about a child's schedule? The Holbrooks have enough lawyers and political connections to destroy my career if I make accusations I can't prove in court. But you think I can do something about it. I think you're Dylan's father, and fathers have rights and resources that hospital supervisors don't. Ashley met his eyes directly. And I think you're not the kind of man who lets threats to his child go unanswered. Cole was quiet for a long moment, weighing his response carefully. Ashley had taken significant personal and professional risks to bring him this information. She deserved honesty, but not complete transparency about his capabilities or intentions. What do you want me to do? Protect your son. And if you can find a way to protect other potential victims in the process. She shrugged. I won't ask questions about your methods. Cole slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket. I'll need to verify this information independently. I understand. But Cole, Ashley reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. Be careful. The Holbrooks have destroyed people who got in their way. They're not just wealthy, they're ruthless. After Ashley left, Cole remained at the coffee shop for another hour, ostensibly reading a newspaper while actually observing the street traffic and pedestrian patterns around the building. Counter-surveillance was an automatic precaution when dealing with sensitive intelligence, and the information Ashley had provided definitely qualified as sensitive. No one seemed to be watching him, but that didn't mean much. Professional surveillance teams were nearly invisible when properly deployed. Cole made mental notes of license plates, faces, and unusual behavior patterns before finally leaving the coffee shop through the rear exit that connected to an alley behind the building. His truck was parked 2 blocks away, another precaution that allowed him to detect potential followers. As he drove home through Riverside's quiet residential streets, Cole's mind was already adapting his plans to account for this new intelligence. The Holbrook family's vulnerabilities were greater than he'd initially assessed. Men who preyed on vulnerable women typically had other secrets, other weaknesses that could be exploited. Troy's pattern of behavior suggested psychological compulsions that would eventually lead to mistakes, especially if those compulsions were manipulated by someone who understood predatory psychology. More importantly, Dylan's safety was now the primary tactical objective. Everything else, personal revenge, professional humiliation, financial consequences, was secondary to ensuring his son remained protected from a potential predator who had married his way into unrestricted access. Cole pulled into his driveway as Dylan's school bus rounded the corner. He watched his son hop down the bus steps, backpack slung over one shoulder, waving goodbye to friends through the windows. Dylan looked happy, innocent, completely unaware that his father had just received intelligence that would reshape their lives in ways the boy couldn't imagine. Hey, Dad. Dylan bounded up the driveway, his face bright with 8-year-old enthusiasm. Guess what happened at school today? Tell me everything, Cole said, meaning it more than his son could possibly understand. As they walked into the house together, Cole's hand resting protectively on Dylan's shoulder, he was already beginning to plan the kind of operation he'd hoped never to execute again. But some threats required responses that went beyond legal remedies and social consequences. Some threats required the complete and systematic destruction of the people who posed them. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Preparation. Cole's intelligence network had been dormant for 5 years, but reactivating it required only a few carefully placed phone calls. By Thursday evening, he had confirmation of Ashley's information plus additional details that painted an even darker picture of Troy Holbrook's predatory behavior. Marcus Delacroix, a former Special Forces operator who now ran a private security firm in Atlanta, had provided the most useful intelligence. Troy's pattern wasn't limited to his dealerships or Lydia's hospital. He'd been quietly settling harassment complaints and assault accusations across 3 states for nearly a decade. The Holbrook family's legal team specialized in making problems disappear through non-disclosure agreements and financial intimidation. You sure you want to go down this road, brother? Marcus had asked during their encrypted phone conversation. These aren't just rich assholes. They're connected rich assholes with serious political protection. They made it personal when they threatened my son, Cole had replied. And now I know they're a legitimate danger to him. Marcus had sighed, recognizing the tone in Cole's voice. They'd served together in places where protecting innocent lives sometimes required eliminating those who threatened them. What do you need? Intelligence, surveillance equipment, and maybe some specialized consultation down the line. Done. But Cole, make sure you can live with whatever you're planning. Some lines, once you cross them, you can't go back. Cole had considered that warning while reviewing the surveillance photos Marcus had provided within hours of their conversation. Troy leaving a downtown hotel at 2 a.m. with a young woman who appeared intoxicated. Troy having lunch with a 17-year-old who worked at his newest dealership. Troy visiting massage parlors that advertised services not typically associated with therapeutic muscle treatment. The man his ex-wife had married wasn't just a sexual predator. He was an escalating one. The pattern suggested someone whose behavior was becoming more brazen and more dangerous as he gained confidence in his family's ability to protect him from consequences. Dylan's weekend with Lydia was scheduled to begin Friday evening. Under normal circumstances, Cole would have honored the custody agreement without question. But circumstances were no longer normal, and his son's safety took precedence over legal obligations. Friday afternoon, Cole picked Dylan up from school as usual, but instead of heading home, he drove to the mall on the other side of town. "Where are we going, Dad?" Dylan asked, clearly excited by the unexpected deviation from routine. "Shopping trip. We need to get you some new clothes and maybe a few other things." "Cool. Can we get ice cream too?" "Absolutely." Cole parked near the department store entrance and pulled out his phone, typing a message to Lydia. "Dylan caught a stomach bug at school. Doctor says he's contagious for 48 hours. We'll make up the weekend time next week." The response came within minutes. "Seriously? This is my weekend with him." Troy planned activities. Cole typed back, "Sorry. Doctor's orders. Don't want to risk spreading it to other kids." Lydia's next message was less diplomatic. "This is bullshit, Cole. If you're playing games to get back at us for the wedding, I'll call my lawyer. Call whoever you want. My son's health comes first." He put the phone away and focused on Dylan, who was studying the mall directory with the serious concentration he applied to everything that interested him. "Where should we start, buddy? Can we look at the electronics store? Tommy Chun has this really cool handheld game that I wanted to see." As they walked through the mall, Cole maintained situational awareness while letting Dylan explore and chatter about school friends and weekend plans that now wouldn't include Troy Holbrook's activities. The boy seemed happier than he'd been in months, unaware that his father had just bought them crucial time to implement protective measures. At the electronics store, Cole purchased items that Dylan assumed were gifts: a small GPS tracker disguised as a keychain, a child-safe personal alarm that could be worn as a pendant, and a prepaid cell phone small enough to fit in a pocket. Each item served a dual purpose: entertainment value for an 8-year-old and security monitoring for a father who'd learned to expect threats from unexpected directions. "Dad, why do I need my own phone?" Dylan asked as they sat in the food court, sharing a pizza and milkshakes. "Emergency situations. If you're ever somewhere and need to call me immediately, you don't want to have to find someone else's phone or wait to use one." Cole kept his explanation simple and non-threatening. "It's just a precaution, like wearing a seatbelt in the car." Dylan accepted this reasoning with the easy adaptability of childhood. "Can I call you whenever I want? Anytime, day or night. Even if it's just to say hello." They spent the evening at home, Dylan playing with his new electronics while Cole finalized preparations for the more serious aspects of his plan. The surveillance equipment Marcus had provided would be delivered tomorrow, along with specialized software for monitoring communications and tracking movements. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. Cole was in his workshop, installing security cameras in concealed locations around his property, when Dylan called down the stairs. "Dad, there's a police car in our driveway." Cole set down his tools and headed upstairs, where he found 2 Riverside police officers standing on his front porch. Through the window, he could see Dylan peering at them with curious concern. Officer Patricia Valdez was a veteran Sergeant Cole recognized from community meetings. Her partner, Officer Mike Brennan, no relation despite the shared surname, was younger and clearly uncomfortable with whatever mission had brought them to Cole's door on a Saturday morning. "Good morning, officers," Cole said, opening the door but not inviting them inside. "Is there a problem?" "Morning, Cole," Sergeant Valdez replied. "We received a complaint about a potential custody violation. Your ex-wife says you're refusing to honor a court-ordered visitation schedule." Cole had expected this move. Lydia's new family wouldn't accept his excuse about Dylan's illness without attempting to apply legal pressure. "My son has a contagious stomach virus. I texted his mother yesterday to explain the situation. She says you're lying to interfere with her parental rights." You're welcome to speak with Dr. Sarah Kim at Riverside Pediatrics, Cole replied smoothly. She examined Dylan yesterday afternoon and confirmed the diagnosis. This was partially true. Cole had taken Dylan for a routine checkup and mentioned concerns about a stomach bug, leading to a general conversation about illness prevention that could be interpreted as medical confirmation of his claims. Officer Brennan consulted his notepad. Ma'am, if there's medical documentation. I understand the situation is complicated, Cole interrupted diplomatically. But my priority is my son's health and the health of other children he might come into contact with. I'm happy to make up the missed time once he's recovered. Sergeant Valdez studied Cole's face, her experienced eyes searching for signs of deception or hostility. What she saw was a calm, reasonable father who seemed genuinely concerned about his child's welfare. All right, Mr. Brennan. We'll note your explanation in our report, but I'd recommend calling your ex-wife directly to work out make-up time as soon as possible. Of course. Thank you for checking on the situation. After the officers left, Dylan emerged from the living room where he'd been listening to the conversation. Dad, am I really sick? Cole knelt down to his son's level, choosing his words carefully. You're not sick right now, but sometimes parents have to make decisions to keep their children safe. Do you trust me to make good decisions about your safety? Dylan nodded solemnly. Are you protecting me from something? I'm making sure you're safe, healthy, and happy. That's my job as your father. Okay. Dylan accepted this explanation with the faith that children place in parents they trust completely. Can we work on the birdhouse today? Absolutely. As they spent the afternoon in the workshop, Dylan carefully sanding pieces of pine while Cole shaped joints with practiced precision. Cole's phone buzzed with increasingly hostile messages from Lydia. Her threats escalated from legal action to involving Child Protective Services to having her new family handle the situation directly. The last message was the most revealing. Troy says you're playing a dangerous game. He has resources you can't imagine. Don't push this. Cole smiled as he typed his response, looking forward to meeting these resources. Should be interesting. He deleted the message thread and focused on his son, who was concentrating intently on his sanding technique. Dylan had no idea that his father had just accepted a direct challenge from adversaries who had seriously underestimated both his capabilities and his determination. The war Cole had declared at the wedding reception was about to move into its active phase, and the Holbrook family was about to discover what happened when wealthy, connected predators found themselves targeted by someone who'd spent years hunting much more dangerous prey in places where the rules of civilized society didn't apply. Some lessons could only be learned through direct experience, and Cole was prepared to be a very thorough teacher. Chapter 5. The Predator's Mistake. Monday brought the kind of gray October rain that made Riverside's affluent neighborhoods look deceptively peaceful. Cole dropped Dylan at school with extra security precautions, walking him to the building instead of using the car line, speaking briefly with his teacher about pickup procedures, and ensuring the boy understood the importance of waiting inside the building if Cole was delayed. Remember, buddy, if anyone besides me comes to pick you up, you stay with Mrs. Patterson until we can call and confirm it's okay. Dylan nodded seriously. Even if they say you sent them? Especially if they say I sent them. We have code words, remember? They'd established a simple system during their weekend together. If Cole ever needed to send someone else to collect Dylan, that person would know to mention their upcoming fishing trip to Crater Lake. It was a detail only Dylan and Cole knew, making it impossible for unauthorized people to fake legitimacy. After leaving the school, Cole drove to a storage facility on the industrial side of town, where Marcus had arranged for the delivery of surveillance equipment that would make the NSA envious. High-resolution cameras, long-range listening devices, GPS trackers, and communication intercept technology that existed in legal gray areas but remained available to those who knew how to acquire it. Cole spent the morning installing monitoring equipment around the Holbrook family's various properties and business locations. Troy's main dealership on Commerce Street provided the easiest access. Cole posed as a potential customer interested in luxury imports, allowing him to plant listening devices and cameras while supposedly examining vehicles. The Holbrook family mansion required more sophisticated approaches. Cole used skills learned during infiltration operations to breach their security system and install monitoring equipment in locations that would capture both video and audio from key areas of the house. The legal implications of this surveillance were irrelevant compared to the intelligence value and his son's safety. By noon, Cole had comprehensive coverage of his target's communications, movements, and activities. What he discovered during the first few hours of monitoring confirmed Ashley's warnings and revealed threats that were more immediate than he'd anticipated. Troy's phone calls painted a picture of a man whose predatory behavior was escalating rapidly. A conversation with his brother Austin revealed plans to teach the soldier boy some respect through physical intimidation. More disturbing were Troy's calls to several young women, using a combination of financial incentives and subtle threats to arrange private meetings. But the most alarming intelligence came from a conversation between Troy and Harrison Holbrook, recorded in the living room of the family mansion that evening. "The ex-husband is becoming a problem," Troy said, his voice carrying the petulant tone of a man accustomed to getting his way. "He's interfering with my time with the boy." "What kind of interference?" Harrison's voice was calmer, but carried undertones of practiced menace. "Lydia was supposed to bring Dylan over this weekend. I had plans for some bonding time, just the two of us. But Cole claimed the kid was sick." Cole's blood went cold as he listened through his earpiece, understanding the implications of Troy's disappointed tone when discussing private time with an 8-year-old. "Maybe it's time for a more direct approach," Harrison suggested. "Sometimes people need to understand the consequences of opposing this family." "What did you have in mind?" "Austin has friends who handle these kinds of problems. Nothing permanent, just enough to make the message clear." Cole paused the recording and sat back in his truck, parked in a McDonald's parking lot where he could monitor the feeds without attracting attention. The Holbrooks weren't just wealthy bullies. They were actively planning physical violence against him and potentially seeking access to Dylan for purposes that made Cole's stomach turn. The intelligence changed his tactical assessment completely. This wasn't a situation that could be handled through legal channels or social pressure. The Holbrooks were operating like a criminal organization, using violence and intimidation to achieve their goals while hiding behind legitimate business facades. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Dylan's school. "Mr. Brennan, Dylan seems upset today. Could you call when convenient?" "Mrs. Patterson." Cole immediately dialed the school's main number, his pulse quickening with parental concern. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Cole Brennan. I got your message about Dylan." "Oh, Mr. Brennan, thank you for calling back so quickly. Dylan has been distracted all day, and during lunch he asked me some concerning questions." "What kind of questions?" "He wanted to know if there were bad men who hurt children, and if his new stepfather might be one of them. When I asked why he was thinking about this, he said you'd been acting worried and protective lately." Cole closed his eyes, realizing that his 8-year-old son's perceptive nature had picked up on tensions that Cole thought he'd concealed. "I'll pick him up early today and have a conversation with him about his concerns. That might be wise. He's a very intelligent boy, Mr. Brennan. Children his age often sense adult problems even when we think we're protecting them from worry." 20 minutes later, Cole was walking through Riverside Elementary's hallways toward Dylan's classroom, his mind racing through age-appropriate explanations for increasingly adult problems. How do you tell an 8-year-old that his mother's new husband might be a predator without destroying the child's sense of security? Dylan was waiting in Mrs. Patterson's classroom, his small figure hunched over a desk where he was drawing elaborate battle scenes between stick figures. Cole recognized the therapeutic value of the artwork. His son was processing anxiety through creative expression. "Hey buddy, ready to go home?" Dylan looked up with relief. "Dad, can we talk about the bad men?" Mrs. Patterson gave Cole a sympathetic look. "I'll let you two work this out privately. Dylan, remember what we discussed about asking questions when you're worried." In the truck, driving home through Riverside's quiet residential streets, Cole struggled to find the right words. Dylan deserved honesty, but not the kind of brutal truth that would traumatize him. "Dylan, sometimes adults have problems that kids shouldn't have to worry about. But part of being your father means I have to handle those problems to keep you safe. Is Troy one of the problems?" The direct question caught Cole off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you've been different since Mom's wedding. And because when Troy looks at me, it feels..." Dylan struggled for words. "It feels wrong. Like when someone stares at you in a way that makes you want to hide." Cole pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine, giving Dylan his complete attention. His son's intuitive assessment matched the intelligence Cole had gathered through sophisticated surveillance equipment. "Your instincts are good, Dylan. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable, you should always trust that feeling and tell me about it immediately. So Troy is bad. Troy is someone we need to be very careful around. And that's why we have new rules about safety, and why you have the emergency phone, and why we practice what to do in different situations. Dylan nodded solemnly. Are you going to stop him from being bad? The question hung in the air between them, carrying implications that reached far beyond a child's understanding of right and wrong. Cole looked into his son's eyes and saw trust, concern, and the kind of fierce loyalty that existed between fathers and sons who'd faced the world together. I'm going to make sure he can never hurt you or anyone else, Cole said quietly. But you need to let me handle the adult problems while you focus on being a kid. Okay, Dad. I trust you. That evening, after Dylan was asleep, Cole returned to his workshop and the surveillance feeds from the Holbrook properties. What he saw through the cameras he'd installed in Troy's home office made his decision about next steps absolutely clear. Troy was on his computer, browsing websites that featured content involving minors in situations that were both illegal and sickening. The man Lydia had married wasn't just a predator with poor impulse control. He was an active participant in exploitation networks that destroyed children's lives for the entertainment of wealthy degenerates. Cole screenshot the evidence, encrypted it, and sent copies to Marcus with instructions for secure storage. Then he opened a different kind of file on his computer, operational plans he'd hoped never to use again, but which were designed for exactly this type of situation. Some enemies could be defeated through legal systems, social pressure, or financial consequences. Others required more permanent solutions, implemented by people who understood that true justice sometimes operated outside the boundaries of law and civilization. Troy Holbrook had just crossed a line that marked him for complete and systematic destruction, carried out by someone who possessed both the skills and the moral clarity to see the mission through to its conclusion. The only question now was whether that destruction would be swift or slow, public or private, legal or extra-legal. Cole was qualified to execute any of those options, and the choice would depend entirely on what approach best protected Dylan and other potential victims. War had been declared at a wedding reception, but the real battle was about to begin. Chapter 6. The network expands. Cole's next move required allies who understood the stakes and possessed capabilities that complemented his own skills. Tuesday morning found him driving 2 hours north to a small town where Amy Rodriguez operated a specialized consulting firm that officially provided corporate security services and unofficially handled problems that required discretion and expertise typically acquired through military or intelligence careers. Amy had served as a military police investigator before transitioning to civilian law enforcement and eventually establishing her own practice. She specialized in cases involving crimes against children, often working with victims' families when official channels proved inadequate or compromised by political considerations. Her office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian house on the town's main street, with security measures that were subtle but comprehensive. Cole was buzzed through 2 separate entries before reaching a reception area where Amy waited with coffee and the kind of focused attention that former investigators brought to serious cases. Marcus said you had a situation involving your son, she began without preamble. Show me what you've got. Cole spread printed surveillance photos and transcribed conversations across Amy's conference table, building a comprehensive picture of the threat facing Dylan and other potential victims. Amy reviewed each piece of evidence with professional detachment, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional context. This is comprehensive intelligence, she said after reviewing the complete file. You've documented pattern behavior, established escalating risk factors, and identified multiple potential victims. In a perfect world, this would be sufficient for law enforcement action. But we don't live in a perfect world. No, we don't. The Holbrooks have enough political connections to complicate any official investigation, especially one initiated by an ex-husband with military training and obvious personal motivations. Amy leaned back in her chair, studying Cole's face. Marcus also mentioned that you're considering extra-legal responses. I'm considering whatever responses are necessary to protect my son and stop a predator. Amy nodded slowly. I understand that motivation. But before we discuss operational options, I need to know your boundaries. How far are you willing to go? Cole met her eyes directly. As far as necessary. That's not an answer. That's an emotional reaction. Amy's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen good people make terrible decisions when protecting their children. I need to know if you're thinking about intimidation, financial destruction, social humiliation, physical violence, or permanent elimination. All of the above, depending on what works and what doesn't. Amy was quiet for several minutes, studying surveillance photos of Troy with various young women. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different tone, not the neutral professionalism of a consultant, but the personal commitment of someone who'd made similar decisions. I have a daughter, she said simply. She's 16 now, but when she was younger, we dealt with a situation similar to yours. A family friend who turned out to be a predator with protection from wealthy relatives and political connections. What did you do? What needed to be done? Amy met Cole's eyes. The official investigation went nowhere. The unofficial investigation was more successful. How successful? The threat was permanently eliminated without creating legal complications for my family or other potential victims. Cole understood the implications of her carefully chosen words. I could use consultation from someone with that kind of experience. You could use more than consultation. You could use a partner who understands the operational requirements and psychological aftermath of protecting children from monsters who hide behind wealth and political connections. Over the next 2 hours, Cole and Amy developed a comprehensive plan that addressed both immediate threats and long-term objectives. Phase 1 involved gathering additional intelligence and evidence that could be used for either legal prosecution or extralegal action, depending on circumstances. Phase 2 focused on systematic destruction of the Holbrook family's business interests, political connections, and social standing. Phase 3 involved permanent elimination of the primary threat, implemented in a way that appeared accidental or natural. The key is patience and precision, Amy explained as they reviewed operational timelines. Rushed actions create evidence trails and legal complications. Professional operations leave no traces and no questions. Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. Dylan's court-ordered visit is this weekend. If you interfere again, I'm filing contempt charges. He showed the message to Amy, who frowned as she read it. They're escalating pressure to gain access to your son. That suggests urgency on their part, which probably means escalating compulsions. How do I handle the custody situation without violating court orders? Carefully. We need Dylan protected, but we also need you out of jail and available to implement our plan. Amy pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Dr. Sarah Kim, this is Amy Rodriguez. I need to discuss a consultation regarding child welfare concerns. Yes, I can be there this afternoon. After ending the call, Amy explained her strategy. Dr. Kim will conduct a comprehensive psychological evaluation of Dylan, focusing on his reactions to Troy and the new family situation. If she finds evidence of trauma or stress related to the stepfather, she can recommend modified custody arrangements pending further evaluation. Will that hold up in court? Long enough for us to implement phase 1 of our plan. After that, court orders won't be relevant. Cole spent the drive home considering the weight of decisions he was making. Amy's partnership offered capabilities and resources that dramatically improved their chances of success, but it also meant crossing lines that would fundamentally change who he was as a person and a father. By the time he reached Riverside, Cole had accepted that those changes were inevitable. The moment Troy Holbrook had targeted Dylan, certain outcomes became unavoidable. The only variables were timing, methods, and collateral damage. Dylan was waiting at home with Mrs. Chun, the elderly neighbor who provided after-school care when Cole's work schedule required it. The boy seemed calmer than he'd been in recent days, but Cole noticed the way Dylan stayed close to his side and kept checking the windows as if expecting unwelcome visitors. Dad, can we work on the birdhouse tonight? Dylan asked as Mrs. Chun gathered her things to leave. Of course, but first, I need to tell you about some changes to this weekend's plans. Dylan's expression grew serious. Am I going to Mom's house? Not this weekend. A doctor needs to talk with you about how you're feeling about all the changes in our family situation. It's not because you're in trouble or sick. It's just to make sure everyone understands what's best for you. Will you be there too? I'll be right there with you. That evening, as they worked together in the shop, Dylan carefully painting the birdhouse while Cole prepared for surveillance activities that would begin after his son's bedtime, Cole reflected on the irony of their situation. He was teaching his son to build, and create while simultaneously planning to destroy the people who threatened their family. Both activities required patience, precision, and attention to detail. Both served to protect what mattered most. The only difference was that one was legal and socially acceptable, while the other operated in shadows where justice took forms that civilized society preferred not to acknowledge. Cole watched Dylan's careful brushstrokes, the boy's tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, and felt the familiar cold certainty that had sustained him through military operations in hostile territories. Some threats required responses that went beyond law, morality, and social convention. Some enemies could only be stopped by people willing to become monsters in service of protecting innocence. Cole had been that kind of monster before, in places where American interests required actions that were never officially acknowledged. Now he would become that monster again, closer to home, for reasons that were infinitely more personal and important. The transformation had already begun. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Dr. Sarah Kim's evaluation of Dylan took place Thursday afternoon in her comfortable office decorated with child-friendly artwork and toys designed to put young patients at ease. Cole waited in the reception area, monitoring surveillance feeds on his phone, while Dylan spoke privately with the pediatric psychologist about his feelings regarding his parents' divorce and his mother's remarriage. The session lasted 90 minutes. When Dylan emerged, he looked tired but relieved, as if he'd been able to express concerns that had been weighing on him for weeks. "Your son is a remarkably perceptive child," Dr. Kim told Cole during their private consultation afterward. "He's experiencing age-appropriate anxiety about family changes, but he's also exhibiting stress responses that suggest exposure to adult situations that make him uncomfortable." "What kind of situations?" He mentioned that his stepfather asks personal questions about his body, his sleeping habits, and his comfort with physical affection. He also described feeling watched in ways that make him want to hide. Dr. Kim's expression was professionally neutral, but Cole could see concern in her eyes. These could be innocent interactions misunderstood by a child, but they could also indicate inappropriate boundary testing. "What do you recommend?" "Supervised visitation only until a family court counselor can conduct a more comprehensive evaluation. I'll submit my report to the court this afternoon with a recommendation that custody arrangements be modified pending further investigation." Cole felt a wave of relief mixed with grim satisfaction. Dr. Kim's professional assessment provided legal cover for protecting Dylan while he and Amy implemented their operational plan. That evening, Cole's surveillance equipment captured the Holbrook family's reaction to Dr. Kim's court filing. The conversation between Troy and his father, recorded in Harrison's home office, revealed both their desperation and their willingness to escalate beyond legal remedies. "This is your fault." Harrison's voice was sharp with anger. "I told you to be more careful with the boy." "I was careful," Troy protested. "I barely talked to him." "Kids are paranoid these days. Kids are trained to report inappropriate behavior. You idiot." "Now we have a psychologist questioning your interactions with your stepson, and that opens doors to investigations we can't control. So what do? We handle the ex-husband directly. Austin's friends are ready to send a message that will end his interference permanently." Cole smiled grimly as he listened to the recorded conversation. The Holbrooks were about to make exactly the kind of mistake that would justify everything he and Amy had planned. Friday evening brought the confrontation Cole had been expecting. 3 men approached his house at 9 p.m., moving with the casual arrogance of people accustomed to intimidating their targets through superior numbers and implied violence. Cole watched them through his security cameras as they positioned themselves around his property, one at the front door, one covering the back exit, and one apparently serving as a lookout. Cole had prepared for this scenario. Dylan was safely at Marcus's secure facility 2 hours away, ostensibly for a weekend camping trip, but actually for protection during the operational phase. The house was equipped with recording equipment that would capture everything the intruders said and did. And Cole himself was ready to demonstrate why former military intelligence operatives weren't ideal targets for amateur intimidation. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:15 p.m. Cole answered it wearing jeans and a t-shirt, projecting the image of a relaxed homeowner who wasn't expecting trouble. Cole Brennan. The man at his door was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive posture that usually made civilians back down immediately. "That's me. Can I help you?" "We need to talk about your attitude problem." "My attitude problem?" You've been causing trouble for the Holbrook family. That needs to stop." Cole stepped aside, gesturing for the man to enter. "Why don't you come in and explain what kind of trouble you think I'm causing?" The three men entered Cole's living room, clearly confident that they held every advantage in the situation. What they didn't realize was that Cole had just committed them to a controlled environment where he held complete tactical superiority. "Here's how this works," the lead man began, pulling out a baseball bat that had been concealed under his jacket. "You're going to stop interfering with Troy's relationship with his stepson. You're going to withdraw that bullshit psychological evaluation. And you're going to stay away from the Holbrook family permanently. And if I don't, then we make sure you understand the consequences of crossing people with resources." Cole nodded thoughtfully. "I see. So Troy Holbrook sent you here to threaten me because I'm protecting my son from a predator." Troy Holbrook is a respected businessman who's trying to build a relationship with his new family. You're a bitter ex-husband who can't accept that your wife moved on to a better man. Interesting perspective. Cole moved casually toward the kitchen, drawing the men deeper into the house. "Can I offer you anything to drink before we continue this conversation?" "This isn't a social call, asshole." "No, I suppose it isn't." What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but permanently changed the power dynamic between Cole and the Holbrook family. Years of military training, combined with the cold fury of a father protecting his child, produced a level of violence that shocked even Cole with its efficiency and brutality. The first man never had a chance to swing his baseball bat. Cole's kitchen knife buried itself in his shoulder, pinning him against the wall while Cole disarmed him with a joint lock that produced an audible crack of breaking bones. The second man managed to draw a pistol before Cole's improvised garrote rendered him unconscious. The third tried to flee but found the back door locked and Cole behind him with the recovered baseball bat. 10 minutes later, three men who'd entered Cole's house with the intention of delivering a beating were instead zip-tied to kitchen chairs, bleeding from various injuries, and facing a homeowner who no longer resembled a mild-mannered carpenter. "Gentlemen," Cole said conversationally, cleaning blood from his hands with a kitchen towel, "we need to have a serious discussion about the Holbrook family and their methods of problem-solving." The lead man, despite a dislocated shoulder and obvious shock, tried to maintain his aggressive stance. "You're fucked now, Brennan. This is assault with a deadly weapon. Prison time." Cole smiled, an expression that contained no warmth whatsoever. "Actually, this is self-defense against home invaders who came here with weapons and threatened my family. I have everything recorded, including your admission that Troy Holbrook sent you." He played back a portion of the recording on his phone, letting them hear their own voices admitting to being hired muscle for the Holbrooks. "Here's what's going to happen," Cole continued. "You're going to tell me everything about your arrangement with the Holbrook family. Who hired you, what they paid you, what other jobs you've done for them, and what their future plans involve. In exchange, I'll let you leave here alive and won't turn this recording over to police. And if we don't talk?" Cole picked up the kitchen knife, testing its edge against his thumb. "Then we'll discover how much pain you can endure before you change your minds about cooperation." The interrogation lasted 2 hours and provided intelligence that exceeded Cole's expectations. The Holbrook family had been using hired violence to solve problems for years, targeting business competitors, former employees who'd filed complaints, and anyone who interfered with their various criminal enterprises. Troy's predatory behavior was protected by a network that included corrupt police officers, compromised judges, and professional criminals who specialized in making problems disappear. More importantly, Cole learned that Dylan wasn't Troy's first target. 3 other children had been victimized over the past 5 years, their families either bought off or intimidated into silence. One family had left the state after their 8-year-old daughter was hospitalized following an accident that occurred after they'd attempted to file charges against Troy. By midnight, Cole had everything he needed to justify the complete destruction of everyone connected to the Holbrook organization. The 3 men were released with injuries that would require medical attention but wouldn't prove fatal, along with a message for their employers. "Tell Harrison and Troy that they have 48 hours to leave Riverside permanently," Cole said as they stumbled toward their car. "After that, anyone associated with their family or their businesses becomes a legitimate target. You can't threaten the Holbrooks. They own this town." "I'm not threatening them," Cole replied. "I'm declaring war on them. There's a difference." Saturday morning, Cole called Amy to report the night's developments and confirmed that Phase 2 of their plan would begin immediately. 3 other children? Amy's voice carried the controlled rage that Cole recognized in himself. We're not just stopping a predator. We're dismantling an entire network. That was always the plan. Now we have justification for maximum force. I'll mobilize additional resources. This is bigger than we anticipated, but it's also more important than we realized. As Cole prepared for the systematic destruction of everyone who'd participated in or enabled the abuse of children, he felt the familiar cold certainty that had sustained him through military operations where moral ambiguity was a luxury he couldn't afford. Some battles were fought for national interests or strategic objectives. Others were fought for reasons that reached deeper than politics or profit, touching the fundamental human obligation to protect innocence from predators. This was one of those battles, and Cole intended to win it completely. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Begins. Sunday morning brought news that the Holbrook family had chosen escalation over retreat. Rather than leaving Riverside as Cole had demanded, they'd contacted their network of corrupt officials and hired additional security. Harrison Holbrook held a press conference at the country club, portraying his family as victims of harassment by a dangerous ex-military individual with a history of mental instability. Cole watched the press conference from his workshop while cleaning weapons that hadn't been used since his military service. The Holbrooks were following a predictable playbook: use media manipulation and political connections to reframe the situation, portraying the aggressor as the victim while mobilizing official protection for their criminal enterprise. It was exactly the kind of mistake that Cole had hoped they'd make. Amy arrived at noon with 2 additional team members: David Park, a former FBI agent who specialized in cybersecurity and digital warfare, and Elena Vasquez, an ex-CIA operative whose expertise included surveillance, infiltration, and what she euphemistically called problem resolution. The press conference was a gift, Amy said as they reviewed operational plans in Cole's secured workshop. Public statements create accountability. Now everything they do is being watched and recorded. David had spent the morning infiltrating the Holbrook family's digital infrastructure. Their cybersecurity is amateur level. I have access to personal communications, business records, financial transactions, and... He paused, his expression darkening. Evidence of activities that go far beyond what we initially suspected. Show me. David's laptop displayed screenshots of conversations, financial records, and digital files that painted a picture of systematic criminal activity spanning multiple states and involving dozens of victims. The Holbrook family wasn't just wealthy predators. They were operating a network that included human trafficking, exploitation of minors, and connections to organized crime figures who provided muscle and political protection. This changes everything, Elena said, studying the evidence. We're not dealing with local criminals. This is a sophisticated operation with national connections. Cole reviewed the intelligence with professional detachment, categorizing threats and opportunities while suppressing emotional reactions that could compromise tactical judgment. The scope of the Holbrook network meant that Dylan wasn't just at risk from Troy. He was a potential target for anyone who might use him to control Cole's actions. Recommendations? Cole asked. Complete network destruction, Amy replied without hesitation. Everyone connected to this organization represents a potential future threat to Dylan or other children. Half measures aren't sufficient when dealing with organized predators. Elena nodded agreement. We need to eliminate the entire structure: financial resources, political protection, personnel, and leadership. Otherwise, survivors will eventually regroup and resume operations. David pulled up organizational charts showing the Holbrook network structure. 47 individuals across 6 states, plus an unknown number of victims who've been coerced into participation. Standard law enforcement approaches would take years and alert targets to flee or destroy evidence. Timeline for complete resolution? Cole asked. 72 hours if we coordinate simultaneous operations, Elena replied. Key targets eliminated first, then systematic destruction of financial and political assets, followed by evidence release that destroys any survivor's credibility and freedom. Cole considered the implications of what they were planning. 47 people marked for elimination based on their participation in child exploitation networks. It was the kind of operation that would normally require presidential authorization and involve multiple government agencies. But normal channels had failed these victims for years, corrupted by the same political connections that protected the predators. Sometimes justice required private citizens to do what their government couldn't or wouldn't do officially. Dylan stays secured until this is finished, Cole decided. I want him completely isolated from any potential retaliation. Already arranged, Amy said. Marcus has him at a facility that's designed for witness protection. No one outside this room knows his location. Monday evening, Phase 2 began with coordinated strikes against the Holbrook Network's financial infrastructure. David's cyber warfare eliminated bank accounts, investment portfolios, and business assets while simultaneously releasing evidence of criminal activity to federal investigators and media outlets across multiple states. Cole and Elena handled direct action components, targeting key personnel who provided muscle and intimidation services for the network. These operations required the kind of skills that Cole had hoped never to use again: infiltration, surveillance, and elimination techniques that left no evidence and no witnesses. The first target was Marcus Webb, a former police officer who'd been taking Holbrook money to suppress investigations and intimidate victims' families. Cole found him at a rural cabin where he'd been planning to disappear until the heat died down. Webb never had a chance to draw the weapon he'd been reaching for. Cole's training made the encounter swift and professional, ending with Webb's death appearing to result from a heart attack triggered by recreational drug use, drugs that Elena had introduced to his system while he was unconscious. Clean elimination, Elena reported as they left the cabin. Coroner will rule it natural causes brought on by cocaine overdose. His history of department corruption makes him an unsympathetic victim. Similar operations continued through the night across multiple states as Amy's expanded team systematically eliminated network members who posed ongoing threats to children. Each death appeared accidental or natural, creating no patterns that would suggest coordinated action. Tuesday morning brought the Holbrook family's desperate attempt to strike back. Troy, Harrison, and Austin barricaded themselves in the family mansion with remaining security personnel, apparently believing that wealth and walls could protect them from consequences that were now inevitable. Cole's surveillance equipment provided real-time intelligence about their activities and communications. The conversations he recorded revealed the complete scope of their crimes and their panicked attempts to contact political protectors who were no longer taking their calls. The mayor's not answering, Austin reported during a family meeting in Harrison's study. Neither is Sheriff Morrison or Judge Patterson. They're distancing themselves, Harrison replied, his voice carrying the flat acceptance of a man who understood that his protection network was collapsing. When the evidence starts coming out publicly, they can't afford to be associated with us. So what do we do? Troy asked, his voice high with panic. Cole Brennan is picking off our people one by one. Half our security team is dead or missing. We use the ultimate leverage, Harrison said grimly. We get the kid. Cole's blood went cold as he listened to their plan. Despite being trapped in their mansion and facing the systematic destruction of their organization, the Holbrooks were planning to kidnap Dylan and use him to force Cole's surrender. That's not leverage, Amy said when Cole played her the recording. That's a suicide pact. They know they're finished, so they're planning to take Dylan with them. Location of the child is absolutely secure? Elena asked. Confirmed. Marcus has him at a black site facility that doesn't officially exist. Even if they discover the general location, they'd need military-grade equipment and training to breach the security. Cole felt the familiar cold certainty settling over him as he prepared for the final phase of operations. The Holbrooks had just made their last mistake. Threatening Dylan directly eliminated any remaining moral constraints on Cole's actions. No survivors, he said quietly. No negotiations, no surrenders, no trials. Complete elimination. Amy and Elena exchanged glances, recognizing the tone in Cole's voice. They'd both heard it before, in other contexts, when situations had passed beyond the boundaries of law and civilization. Understood, Amy replied. When do we move? Cole checked his weapons one final time, ensuring that each piece of equipment was properly maintained and ready for use. The Holbrook mansion was well fortified, but Cole had breached more secure locations during military operations in hostile territories. Tonight, he said, we end this. The final battle was about to begin, and Cole intended to make sure that Dylan would never again face threats from predators who hid behind wealth, political connections, and social respectability. Some wars could only end with complete victory, and Cole was prepared to achieve that victory regardless of cost. Chapter 9. The Final Silence. The assault on the Holbrook mansion began at 2 a.m. Wednesday morning, when most of Riverside slept peacefully behind locked doors and security systems that provided the illusion of safety. Cole approached the target using infiltration techniques perfected during classified operations, moving through shadows that concealed both his approach and his intentions. The mansion's security was sophisticated but predictable: motion sensors, cameras, and armed guards who assumed that wealth and firepower provided adequate protection against individual threats. They hadn't prepared for someone with Cole's particular combination of skills, motivation, and complete lack of moral restraint regarding the lives of child predators. Elena provided overwatch from a concealed position that covered the mansion's rear approaches, while Amy coordinated with David to ensure that all communications and surveillance systems would malfunction at precisely the right moments. The operation required perfect timing and absolute ruthlessness, qualities that Cole's team possessed in abundance. Cole's first priority was eliminating the external security without alerting anyone inside the mansion. The two guards patrolling the grounds died silently, their throats cut with military precision that rendered them incapable of raising alarms. Their bodies were concealed in locations where they wouldn't be discovered until long after the operation was complete. Breaching the mansion itself required more sophisticated techniques. Cole used electronic countermeasures to disable security systems, then accessed the building through a service entrance that his surveillance had identified as the least monitored approach. The Holbrooks' overconfidence in their defenses had created vulnerabilities that a professional could exploit with minimal risk. Inside the mansion, Cole moved with the silent efficiency of someone who'd conducted similar operations in places where discovery meant death. The layout was familiar from his surveillance, and he knew exactly where to find his primary targets. Harrison Holbrook died first, eliminated with a suppressed pistol while he slept in his master bedroom. The old man never woke up, passing from dreams to death without understanding that his decades of criminal activity had finally caught up with him. Austin proved more alert, possibly sensing danger through some primitive survival instinct. He managed to reach for a weapon before Cole's knife found his throat, ending both his life and his participation in the family's predatory network. Troy presented the greatest challenge because he was awake, apparently unable to sleep due to panic about his deteriorating situation. Cole found him in the mansion's study, frantically burning documents and computer files that contained evidence of his crimes. "Cole Brennan," Troy said without turning around, apparently recognizing the sound of approaching footsteps. "I've been expecting you. Then you know why I'm here." Troy finally faced him, and Cole saw the desperate fear in the man's eyes. Fear mixed with the kind of rage that came from a lifetime of getting away with actions that would have destroyed lesser men. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Troy asked. "You think killing me makes you better than us?" "I think protecting children from predators is worth any price," Cole replied simply. "Including my soul. Your son will know what you are. He'll know his father is a murderer. My son will know that his father removed threats that the system was unwilling or unable to handle through legal means." Troy lunged for a gun that he'd concealed behind the desk, but Cole had anticipated the move. The combat knife that ended Troy's life also ended the immediate threat to Dylan and countless other potential victims. Cole spent the next hour systematically destroying evidence and staging the scene to appear as though the family had been killed during a robbery gone wrong. Professional criminals often targeted wealthy families, and the Holbrooks' history of hiring violent men created plausible explanations for why such men might eventually turn on their employers. By 4 a.m., Cole was driving home through empty streets, leaving behind a mansion where 3 predators had paid the ultimate price for their crimes. The physical evidence suggested a robbery. The real evidence had been destroyed or would never be found. Wednesday morning brought news reports about the tragic deaths of the prominent Holbrook family, apparently victims of a home invasion by unknown assailants who'd been frightened away before completing their robbery. Police were investigating, but initial findings suggested that the family's connections to various criminal enterprises might have made them targets for professional thieves. Cole watched the coverage with professional satisfaction while preparing breakfast for Dylan's return. His son had been away for nearly a week, supposedly on an extended camping trip, and would be coming home to a world where the primary threat to his safety had been permanently eliminated. Amy called at noon with updates on the broader operation. Network cleanup is complete. 47 targets eliminated across 6 states, financial assets frozen and redistributed to victim compensation funds, evidence packages delivered to federal investigators and media outlets. The entire organization is finished. Collateral damage? Minimal. 3 corrupt officials committed suicide rather than face prosecution, 2 fled the country, and the rest are cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. The victims we identified are receiving medical care and counseling through secure channels. Timeline for Dylan's return. Marcus is driving him back this afternoon. As far as the boy knows, he's been on a camping trip while you handled some business problems. Cole felt a weight lifting from his shoulders as he realized that the threat which had consumed his life for the past month was finally over. Dylan could return to normal childhood activities without the shadow of predators who'd used wealth and political connections to avoid consequences for their crimes. At 3 p.m., Cole stood in his driveway watching Marcus's SUV approach with his son in the passenger seat. Dylan's face was pressed against the window, his expression bright with excitement about the camping adventure and eagerness to see his father again. "Dad!" Dylan burst from the vehicle and ran into Cole's arms, chattering about fishing and hiking and campfire stories that Marcus had shared during their week together. "I missed you so much. Did you finish your business problems?" Cole lifted his son, holding him close and breathing in the scent of wood smoke and childhood innocence that clung to the boy's clothes. "Yes, buddy. All the problems are solved. Does that mean things can go back to normal?" Cole considered the question carefully. Normal meant Dylan attending school without bodyguards, spending weekends with friends instead of secured facilities, and growing up without constant awareness of threats that existed in the adult world. "Better than normal," Cole said. "Much better." That evening, as they worked together in the shop on a new project, a bookshelf for Dylan's bedroom, Cole's phone buzzed with a message from Lydia. "I heard about Troy's family. This is terrible. Dylan and I need to talk about funeral arrangements and what happens next." Cole deleted the message without responding. Lydia had made her choices when she married a predator and ignored warnings about his behavior. The consequences of those choices were hers to handle alone. "Dad, are you okay?" Dylan asked, looking up from the wood he was carefully sanding. "You seem different. Happier, maybe." Cole studied his son's face, seeing the intelligence and perceptiveness that had protected them both throughout this ordeal. Dylan deserved honesty within the boundaries of what an 8-year-old could understand and process. "Sometimes adults have to handle very serious problems to protect their families," Cole said. "When those problems are solved, it feels like a huge weight has been lifted off your shoulders." "Were the problems about Troy?" "Some of them, yes." Dylan nodded solemnly. "I'm glad he's gone. He made me feel scared and uncomfortable." "You'll never have to worry about him again," Cole said with absolute certainty. "And you'll never have to worry about anyone like him, either." "Because you'll protect me?" "Because I'll always protect you, no matter what it takes." Dylan returned to his sanding, satisfied with his father's promise in the way that children accepted fundamental truths about the adults they trusted. Cole watched his son work, noting the careful attention to detail and the satisfaction that came from creating something beautiful and functional. Outside the workshop windows, Riverside settled into its evening routines. Families gathered around dinner tables, children completed homework assignments, and parents tucked their kids into beds where they could sleep safely without fearing the predators who'd once moved freely through their community. Cole had ensured that safety through actions that would never be officially acknowledged or legally sanctioned. The system had failed these families, corrupted by the same wealth and political connections that protected the predators. But private justice had succeeded where public institutions had failed, implemented by people who understood that some threats required permanent solutions. As father and son finished their work and headed inside for dinner, Cole reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past month. He'd entered this conflict as a divorced father trying to protect his son from humiliation and social pressure. He was ending it as something else entirely, someone who'd crossed lines that most people couldn't even imagine, for reasons that made those crossings not just acceptable but necessary. Dylan would grow up in a world where child predators faced consequences that went beyond legal loopholes and political protection. It wasn't the world that civilized society preferred to acknowledge, but it was a world where innocence was protected by people willing to sacrifice their own moral comfort for the sake of children's safety. Cole tucked Dylan into bed that night with the satisfaction of knowing that the boy would sleep peacefully, free from threats that would never again disturb his dreams or his future. Some victories required prices that heroes weren't willing to pay, but fathers faced different moral calculations when their children's lives hung in the balance. The war that had begun at a wedding reception was over, and Cole had won completely. The monsters were all dead, and the children were safe. That was the only victory that mattered. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.